Hello, this is Gerry Pecht, the CEO of Norton Rose Fulbright, and I'm here in the Blue Zone at COP26 with Dirk Forrister. Dirk is the president and CEO of the International Emissions Trading Association, to which we have been members for a number of years now. We are thrilled to be here with you, Dirk, at this tent that you have in the COP26. And to say that it's busy here is an understatement. We've got people from all over the world here. You just left, Dirk, a meeting with Justin Trudeau and others talking about carbon pricing and carbon taxes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. For a number of years, actually, this goes back to just prior to the Paris Agreement, IETA and a number of other organizations formed this group called the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, and the World Bank provides the secretariat for it. And it's a place where governments and businesses that are interested in carbon pricing solutions meet up regularly. But today's event was really about not just Prime Minister Trudeau, but also Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission, the President of the European Commission, Mark Carney, who is a special envoy for climate finance, the President of Sweden, the head of the IMF, the head of the WTO, just all of these notables talking about how ultimately we need to get a convergence on global pricing. And that's in order to deliver the transition and to prompt a new wave of investment. So I think for a lot of businesses, it was responding to that concern about all this fragmentation around the world and the hopes of bringing together more constant signals on carbon pricing. And of course, we think part of that is through a carbon market that can be accessible by multiple companies and multiple governments. So you need that interconnection of markets. But it was really terrific conversation. Yeah.
So let me also say that Dirk has been the president and CEO of IETA for a number of years. He was the managing director at NatSource LLC, which was the manager of one of the world's largest carbon funds. Earlier in his career, he served as the chairman of the White House Climate Change Task Force in the Clinton administration. Prior to that, he was Assistant U.S. Secretary of Energy for Congressional, Public, and Intergovernmental Affairs and Legislative Counsel to Congressman Jim Cooper. He was also the Energy Program Manager at the Environmental Defense Fund. He now serves on the board of directors of the Verified Carbon Standard and as a member of the advisory boards of the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the American Carbon Registry. So you've got a very illustrious career, and it's I know you're very much a part of this conversation. Why is it so important that Article 6 rules be finalized in Glasgow? What's the importance of getting that done?
Well, I think, again, in some ways it ties back to that goal of giving businesses an ability to access a common market and a common pricing system. And we know that's not going to happen overnight. So what Article 6 is about is really the connective tissue between those systems. How do you make sure that the systems connect with good integrity, veracity, so that investors have confidence in it? And it's also got an element of it that includes a new mechanism at a UN level that could approve of carbon units and certify their use anywhere in the world. So that could be a real benefit for developing countries that want to have access to market. And that UN program could really lift up their prospects. So that's kind of what's at stake in the Article 6 talks. It's going to go on for the whole of the 2 weeks, I suspect, and go down to the wire on the final night.
Yeah.
But it is really important, probably the most important tool in the Paris toolbox for the business community. I think it's what businesses care about the most.
So we heard Justin Trudeau and others during this talk that you just left a few minutes ago talk about regulation of carbon prices in certain jurisdictions. What is the role of the private sector? Why is it important for the private sector to be present at the climate change negotiations and have a voice in those discussions?
Well, I think it's the private sector that's going to have to help deliver the transition, right? It's the private sector that's going to bring a lot of the investment necessary, and so there's huge opportunity in it. And I think that's the heart and soul of really why businesses are interested in Article 6. I'd say the other element of it that you're referencing there was Trudeau is talking about remarks really by the head of the IMF on how you might begin to levelize carbon pricing around the world. Because right now there are very low prices in some places like the Ukraine and very high prices in places like Sweden. So how do you level it out? And what they were talking about is, could you have regulatory measures that get treated as equivalent with a carbon tax or a carbon market program? And I think for people in the United States, that will ring true, right? That you might not have a national carbon pricing system, but you might have regulatory standards that are affecting sort of individual sectors, and maybe those could be deemed equivalent with an EU price. But this is because the EU has begun discussions about a carbon border adjustment, a border tax on goods coming in that are from jurisdictions that have poor carbon pricing or no carbon pricing. So that's going to be a big discussion. Now, it's really interesting to see the head of the IMO sitting next to the European Union talking about, well, this is be complicated, but it may be important. Yeah.
And Dirk, how do we ensure that carbon markets retain their integrity? What's the mechanism to ensure the integrity of those markets?
Well, I think the integrity of the cap for a cap and trade regime is fundamental. And we usually do that by having clear policy signals that are set in legislation, and then have measurement and verification programs that keep it intact and, avoid the potential for funny business, if you will. I think on carbon offset projects, as we typically call them, or carbon crediting programs, there you have to do a higher level of scrutiny. And it usually has to follow a standard set by government, or else a private standard that has a lot of rigor around it. Those systems tend to also require independent monitoring and verification of the performance. But I think there's a lot of discussion here about how those will play in the future of the Article 6, because in the aviation arena, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has recognized some of the private carbon standards like the VCS or ACR, the American Carbon Registry, or the Gold Standard, or the Climate Action Reserve in California. We've recognized those as offset production agencies, really. So they can certify offsets for use in that system. So I think some of the people in Article 6 are aware of that. It may accelerate some countries' ability to use carbon pricing systems that use credits. So that is also part of the discussion in Article 6. It's how do you make sure that there's, again, integrity in all of those programs and in how they're administered.
And Dirk, how important is the concept of nature-based solutions for future market activity?
It's interesting. There's a lot of discussion around that today here. This is a forest day at the COP, and some announcements about billions of new investment going into avoiding deforestation or new planting of trees. And I think that it also involves agriculture, right? Some potential for storage in soils. Those have some of the same attributes of carbon markets, in that they have to be sort of certified and approved for use. But increasingly, we're seeing national compliance systems for carbon pricing that recognize nature-based solutions. California has done it for some time. Alberta's done it even longer, but it's popped up in Colombia. It's popped up in South Africa. And I think there are going to be other countries that see this important long-term trend toward removals. So that's one of the things forests and farms can do, is remove carbon from the atmosphere. As long as you can measure and verify and certify it, I think they've got a robust future, and will be kind of a trend in the future.
So my last question, Dirk, and thank you so much for doing this, is how confident are you that there are going to be some meaningful outcomes from this conference over the next 2 weeks?
Well, I have to be an optimist, right? In the role that we play here, we have to provide positive energy from the business community that we really need these mechanisms to get in place. We need a success on Article 6 to really unleash a new wave of investment. And I'm actually feeling really good about it, because there's been so much time to work on it. Even though they haven't been face to face, there's been a lot of time to work bilaterally. And I know the UK government has done its part in helping. So I would say I think it's 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 chance of getting it right, and 1/3 I'm a little nervous.
Well, look, thank you so much for talking with me today. And look, we greatly appreciate it, Norton Rose Fulbright, the relationship we have with IETA and with you. And it's so good to have you today. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So great to be with you, Gerry. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.